The following is a special presentation on AZTV 7.
Welcome to Before You Vote. I'm Mike Broomhead. This AZTV special program is here to help you, the voter, understand the 2022 midterm election. We'll be talking with candidates and data analysts to give you insight into who and what is on the ballot. On today's show, we're talking with the two candidates from the Democratic Gubernatorial primary race, Marco Lopez and Katie Hobbs. First, we sit down with Marco Lopez. Now, Marco has been the mayor of Nogales here in Arizona. He also has worked at the federal level on border issues, so it's an issue that's very important to him and one he's very knowledgeable about. We will then talk with Katie Hobbs. Katie Hobbs is the current Secretary of State in charge of elections here in the state of Arizona and has gained national attention because of the questions with the 2020 election and election integrity. So these should be some very, very interesting conversations with these two candidates. Plus, we have a segment we call Tracking Arizona. We're doing weekly conversations with Chief of Research and Managing Partner at OH Predictive Insights, Mike Noble. Mike's polling data is used across the state of Arizona and the southwestern United States, not only by candidates, but by people like me in the media and others in the know on elections. We're discussing this week with Mike how Roe v. Wade decision has changed the top issues here in Arizona and how that's going to affect our election here in the state. We're giving you a lot of information that you need to know. You're not going to want to miss this show, especially if you're going to vote in the Democratic primary. This is a show you're going to want to watch because it's not just what the candidates are talking about, but how they want to solve issues differently from each other. So stick around. We're going to be back here in exactly 60 seconds. And welcome back to Before You Vote. Joining us now, Democrat candidate for governor's office, Marco Lopez. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to be here.
Just a general question we've been asking all the candidates. In your primary, what uniquely qualifies you to win this race over your opponent?
Well, look, it's that experience that I've generated over the last 20 years. I started young at 22 as mayor in Nogales, a border community, the largest border community in our state. I was director of commerce for the state of Arizona. For President Obama, I ran the largest law enforcement agency in the country, 60,000 men and women deployed across the world with a budget of $13.4 billion. And the last 10 years in the private sector, creating jobs back in our economy. If we're going to be successful as Democrats in uniting our state, for either party, for all people that we represent, you have to have that background both in leadership, executive, and as a job creator. I'm more convinced of that than when I started 14 months ago, Mike. And this is the final stretch before ballots begin to appear in mailboxes next week.
So big issues that we face here in Arizona, the Supreme Court decision and the border issue is a big one. You're from a border community. Yeah. How do you address that as governor?
Well, look, I think that there are some very key issues that, and we've talked about it on the radio before, the limitations that the governor has and that the state has on federal policy does not preclude you from being the biggest voice for pushing the federal government to get the solutions that we need at the border. I think how I look at it, I start first with making sure that the work that has not been done with DACA recipients, that we get them citizenship, with their families, that we get them a pathway to legalization, and then understanding that the future flows, those folks that our economy is going to continue to need, that we get that system fixed because it is broken. And the last evidence of how broken it is are those 53 asylum seekers that were put into a trailer in San Antonio and obviously perished a couple of days ago. That's a failure. That's the crisis. That's the level of crisis that exists. So we've got to solve that. Now, as an experienced individual who ran the largest law enforcement and trade agency in the country, Customs and Border Protection, I know that we have to push the government to invest in technology, in manpower, and in infrastructure. Today, we know we have 5,000 less agents than we did when I left the agency. We have equipment that is stationed at Davis-Monthan in Tucson, for example, helicopters that aren't flying, trucks that aren't equipped to be able to process and go to the border to go after these cartels that are bringing drugs. I think that's our biggest issue right now, is fentanyl.
Sure.
Going after the smugglers. So that's where, as a state, that's where we can do stuff. We've got to be more aggressive in going after the smugglers and going after the drug trade that we still see coming up. And right now, it's sadly killing so many Arizonans. Fentanyl.
Do you agree with the state budget that just passed that allocated a lot of money for border security from state funds? And how would you use those funds?
Look, I know that the $365 million that was allocated for border wall is nonsense, because that's how I understand that they intend to use it, border wall. Border wall alone, as I've said before, does not work. You need that blend of technology, infrastructure, and manpower. Infrastructure in areas that is needed. When I was there, we continued to build the necessary infrastructure, but it has to be what the law enforcement professionals are telling us, Mike. Not what a lot of the folks who are running against me want to just go down to the border, they take their picture, and then they call that border security. No, it's more complicated than that. So I want to know what restrictions were placed on that $365 billion. And then, because of my knowledge, if it is flexible, then we use it for, as I said, areas that the state government should be involved with, and specifically going after the trade, the fentanyl trade, and then using it to go after the smugglers. I think that is a key area that the state should be involved with. And as the next governor, I'm committed to doing that.
All right, so shift to two more important issues before we close this out. One is Roe v. Wade. As governor, what they're working on, relying now back to a 1901 law, and there's a new law that's going to be going into effect as well. What do you think happens if you become governor? What's going to happen?
Well, look, I think that it is sad and unfortunate that we believe that going back 110 years makes any sense. As a man looking at this issue, I will never know, Mike, what it is like for a woman and her family to make the decision to abort. But what I know is that I, as governor, will stand up for her right and her family's right and the healthcare professionals' right to perform those procedures in Arizona. And so that is why I'm committed to working to codify it into the Arizona Constitution. And as I stated yesterday, I am committed to making sure that any doctor or woman who is criminalized for having sought an abortion or practiced one or having done one, to pardon them. Because that's the ultimate responsibility that as governor I will have. And that is what I can do. And that's what I'm committed to doing.
Okay, last question. Got about a minute left. The expansion of the ESA program, voucher program, school choice program in Arizona. Agree, disagree, and what needs to happen in education in Arizona?
Disagree. I've committed $2.5 billion in our education, public education system to make sure that every child has an equitable and a fair shot to succeed. Just like my parents came here 50 years ago believing that education was going to unlock the opportunities for me and my two sisters to succeed, for me it has worked. For sadly so many families across this state, it does not work. So I want to focus on fixing the public school district system to make sure that every child has the opportunity to sit in a studio like this and be successful.
Well, I appreciate the time here, and I think that it's interesting to hear the different candidates and how they would solve solutions. I think that what the show wants to do is focus on that. So I appreciate the clarity in your answers of saying, this is how I want to fix an existing problem. I think that's what's going to get people's attention, is what your solutions actually are. So thanks for coming down here, and thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate you.
We'll be right back here with Before You Vote. We hope you're enjoying this edition of Before You Vote. Coming up next, we're looking at how the Roe v. Wade decision changes the top issues here in the state of Arizona, plus how that will affect the upcoming election. Later in the show, we sit down with Democratic Gubernatorial Candidate Katie Hobbs. This is Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. It's time for our Tracking Arizona segment. Joining me now is Mike Noble, Chief of Research at OH Predictive Insights. Welcome back, Mike.
Mike, great to be back. Thank you.
Let's talk about the topic of Roe v. Wade or abortion and how it's going to impact this election. Let's start with how people feel about pro-choice versus pro-life.
Yeah, so we've heard a lot of stuff in the news about this, but what do Arizonans think? And so among our registered voters here, we looked at, okay, first off, what percentage consider themselves pro-choice compared to pro-life? And actually, a majority of Arizonans actually consider themselves pro-choice, and only 1/3 consider themselves pro-life, which is interesting given our long historical history of being kind of more of a socially conservative state. And then when you look at this issue, is it black and white, or is it kind of more of a gray area? And actually 9 in 10 Arizona voters believe it should actually be legal in some cases, which I found was pretty fascinating in the poll.
So let's talk about how big of an impact this is going to have. If you watch the news coverage of this from the beginning, it looked as if this was going to now shift everything in the election. How much of an impact will this actually have?
You know, that's a great question. And so we asked that among voters, and we see that among Democrats, they said, yeah, this will definitely impact me more when it comes to my ability to vote or choice to vote in the election. However, when you look at our trend line of enthusiasm, of their motivation to actually go out to vote, we actually didn't see a big increase in that, and we actually saw it tightened up only because Republicans got a little less enthusiastic, and it was mainly driven by Republican women.
So that statistic is kind of telling you that Republican women have lost a little bit of enthusiasm based on this decision. It isn't so much the Democrat enthusiasm increased a whole lot.
Exactly, and that's what I think is interesting is what you hear out there, but hey, what are the facts? And the facts are is that it did tighten up the enthusiasm gap in this midterm election. However, it wasn't that the Democrats got more motivated. Actually, Republican women just got a little less motivated, and that's what's kind of tightened it up. And the question is, can this stay long term, especially when you're pairing up to these tough economic issues that we're currently facing?
Mike, as always, I appreciate the insight. What you guys do over at OH Predictive Insights is great stuff, and so thanks for sharing it again.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be back, and thank you.
Coming up next on Before You Vote, it's our talk with leading Democratic gubernatorial candidate Katie Hobbs. Find out where she stands on the issues that are most important in Arizona. This is Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Joining us is Democratic candidate for governor Katie Hobbs. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Start off with this. What qualifies you for the job of governor?
Well, I have spent the last 12 years in elected office, first in the legislature, now as Secretary of State. I am the only candidate on either side who's won statewide and has had the position I've had to lead our state through a really challenging election in 2020. That's the kind of leadership that I'll bring to the governor's office. And, you know, I got to elected office because I'm a social worker and really was working with some of the most vulnerable Arizonans. And I got frustrated that I didn't see our elected leaders trying to address some of the problems that caused people to end up in the situations they were in. And that's why I ran in the first place. I think I'm someone who can relate to struggles that Arizonans have right now and will bring the leadership that we need to tackle the real issues that we're facing in our state.
So let's talk through some of those issues. The biggest issue for most voters on both sides of the aisle is the economy. Arizona says is positioned, according to experts, to be in a better place if a recession were to come. What does the next governor need to do economically to take Arizona to the next level?
Well, I think it's important to have someone in the governor's office who understands the real struggles that Arizonans are facing, having to make choices between filling up their gas tank to get to work or putting food on the table. I'm the only person in this race who's not a millionaire, and I've lived some of those same struggles myself, both growing up and in my adult life raising kids with my husband. And so, you know, I know what those struggles are like. That's why we put out a comprehensive plan to address affordability. We cut taxes on everyday items like over-the-counter medication, diapers, school supplies. There's a Arizona tax credit for children and a tax credit rebate for people who pursue career and technical education.
Let's talk about some of the specifics of the budget, because I had Speaker Bowers on the radio show along with Reginald Boulding, and they both were complimenting the fact that it was a bipartisan budget. No one got everything they wanted, but everybody seemed happy with some things. What did you think of the budget, and what would you have done differently?
Well, I think what we saw come out of this legislature and this budget is what you can have when people are willing to put aside political differences and tackle the issues that matter. We saw a once in a lifetime investment in public education with $1 billion. That is huge and something that has been long needed. And a lot of other really critical investments in our state. And those are the kind of things that I want to tackle as governor, to continue that bipartisan leadership, working to get things done that matter to Arizonans.
Another big issue in Arizona is the border. And obviously it seems like everybody agrees there's an issue. How do you tackle it differently as governor if you're in the office?
Look, I think first and foremost, we need to address border security. There are obviously criminals coming across the border, smuggling drugs and guns and humans. We need to address that, and the Biden administration needs to do a much better job on border security. As governor, I think it's important, everyone running for governor needs to be really honest with Arizonans about what the governor has the capacity to do versus what is federal. I plan to work in cooperation with local law enforcement to provide the resources the state can provide that will help them keep their communities safe. I think it's important to utilize the state's resources where they can be effective in that manner. Not just sending National Guard down there for a photo op or press conference, but really coordinating with local law enforcement. And when I've talked to them, the border sheriffs, they say they're not getting information from Phoenix, they're not getting coordination, and that's what they really need.
We've been hearing about some frustration from both of our senators who are in the Democratic Party that the administration is kind of failing on the border issue. How do you rebuild a relationship, or how do you get that administration to listen to you as our chief executive on our border issues?
I think all of Washington is failing on the border, not just the current Congress and presidential administration, but for decades they've kicked the can down the road on real comprehensive immigration reform that would address the humanitarian crisis that's at our border, creating a path to citizenship that's tough but fair and incentivizes people to come in legally, not illegally, which we're seeing now. And that needs pushes from border state leaders that understand the issues that our citizens are facing, but working with anyone who will implement those solutions that will work for Arizona.
Let's shift to education. Not only what do we do to raise the quality of education, but now the big topic of education and school security. There's a lot of money allocated for school security and for school safety. How does that money need to be spent? And if you're governor, what happens in that regard?
Well, let me start with education in general. Both of my sisters are teachers, and so I have seen firsthand some of the struggles that our teachers are facing and how that's affecting families and parents and students. And we need to do so much to improve our schools, from supporting teachers with pay, mentorship programs, incentives to stay in the classroom, but then investing in universal pre-K so that our students are getting off to the right start to be successful throughout their school careers. And then at the end of their K-12 education, getting them into those career pathways to high-paying in-demand jobs, whether that's a 4-year college degree or associate's degree or other certificate program. So those are some of the critical investments we need to make in our K-12 school system. But in terms of school safety, I think I'm very encouraged by the federal law that was just passed addressing, gun safety. I'm discouraged that the focus is just on schools, because obviously that's a critical issue. But we're facing a problem as Americans, everything we do going about our daily lives, if it's going to the grocery store, to a shopping mall, a movie theater, a concert, and now a 4th of July parade. So this is not just a school safety issue, it's an American issue, and we need to, this is a great start and we need to do more.
So you would be in favor of strengthening gun laws in the state of Arizona?
I am absolutely supportive of common sense reforms that the majority of not only Arizonans and gun owners, but Americans support, like universal background checks, limiting magazine capacity, red flag laws, and things like that.
Well, I want to say thank you for doing this interview, because the goal of this show is for people to learn a little bit more. In a 7-minute interview, it's hard to do, but it's nice to hear the basics of where you stand on the issues, and just we have informed voters when they go to the polls.
Well, thank you so much for doing this.
All right, we'll be right back on Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. A big thank you to our gubernatorial candidates from the Democratic primary, Marco Lopez and Katie Hobbs. As you can see with the two of them, they both agree mostly on what the issues that Arizona faces are, but they differ in how they would solve those problems and attack them. So why shows like this are so important, those subtle differences in a primary, especially for those of you that will be voting on the Democratic side. Also, a big thank you to Mike Noble from OH Predictive Insights for joining us. Remember, if you miss an interview or you want to rewatch any of them, head over to aztv.com/vote. There you'll find all the past interviews we've done with candidates. There you'll also find links to voter resources, such as how to request a mail-in ballot and candidate information for all of the races. And I want to remind you, if you're an independent voter, you have to be proactive and choose a primary to vote in. That means you've got to let the county recorder know where you live, which of those two primaries you want to vote in to get a ballot in that primary. It's an important election. Don't miss out because you weren't proactive. Next week, we'll be talking with the Maricopa County recorder about the safety changes that they've implemented in this election cycle. It's a great conversation because Maricopa County was ground zero about election integrity. We also have a roundtable discussion with Lori Roberts and Chuck Coughlin, two people that have watched Arizona politics, commented on it, and been a part of it for a very long time right here in the state. It should be a fascinating conversation. Plus, we have Mike Noble back talking about which races voters are looking at for the midterm election and what voter turnout might look like compared to previous years. Should be fascinating conversations with all of those people. I hope you enjoyed today's show. We're looking forward to next week's show. I hope you can join us for that on Before You Vote.